balance, fulfillment, and joy. I'm Kayla Sweet, and together we're going to have fun and create change from the inside out. I'm so glad you're here.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back. I am so excited to be here today talking to you about something that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately. So to start, yesterday I had the opportunity to co-host a women's wellness workshop. It was live and in person, and we were able to dig into stress, what it looks like, how it disproportionately impacts women, and what we can do to start to take back our time, our minds, and our physical health. So this was a beautiful event, and through this experience, I was able to kind of scratch the surface of what I'm going to be talking about today in a little bit more detail. So I'm really excited about it. If you are one of the attendees of the workshop, hopefully this will give you even more context to what we started to talk about there. If you didn't attend, no worries. I will fill in any gaps for you. So in my recent ponderings about stress, I've been thinking about not just the obvious stressors that we are used to navigating on a daily basis, like work stress and family stress and financial stress, but also the invisible stressors that are beneath all of that. These invisible stressors are what truly depletes us. So we're going to talk about 3 different categories of invisible stressors and what we can do to manage them, cope with them, and essentially liberate ourselves from this suffocating grip that these stressors can really have on our lives. And while there are innumerable invisible stressors, today we're just going to talk about 3 different categories. So the first one you've probably heard about before. We're going to dive into mental load and how that functions as an invisible stressor. The second category we're going to look at is societal expectations and conditioning. I talk about this and think about this a lot, so probably not a surprise that this made it into today's episode as well. And then the final category, which we'll just start to scratch the surface of, is the lost parts of ourselves, the parts of ourselves that we have abandoned or exiled to the subconscious because of that societal conditioning or our unrealistic expectations of ourselves. So first, let's talk about mental load, what that is, how it feels, the gender disparities around this, and how we can really work to reduce it. So mental load, you've probably heard of this before, but if not, it's really the cognitive and emotional work that's required to manage a household, relationships, work, and family. It's also known as invisible work. So things like meal planning, scheduling, managing emotions, meeting family needs, managing mental tasks, managing relationship dynamics, figuring out what needs to be done in different life domains, and then assigning or delegating tasks. So it's really that management piece that can happen both at work and outside of work. When I think about the mental load, I imagine a conveyor belt of tasks and responsibilities that just keeps moving at us at a steady pace. And our job is to manage and address each task as it comes down the line to keep things from backing up. But it's not sustainable to just complete and delegate these tasks all day long. Sometimes we need to step away. We need to rest or eat or shower or sleep. And the button to stop the conveyor belt is broken. So when we do step away, these things just pile up to overwhelming heights. And while we're away, we know that that conveyor belt is broken. We know that those tasks aren't going to stop building up. And so we also have the added stress of that awareness of knowing those things are building up, adding up, compiling into this monstrous heap of tasks that is going to be waiting for us when we return. sounds pretty stressful, right? Yeah, that's essentially what this is. It's the fact that not only are we responsible for managing all of these things, but it's also the stress of knowing that when we step away, that conveyor belt's not going to stop. So even when we are trying to rest, there's this background noise, and that's the mental load. And this is something I've heard a lot of people talk about, even in regards to like taking a vacation. I've heard so many people say that taking a vacation, even thinking about it, is stressful because of this, because they know that things are going to keep moving and no one else is going to step in and put things where they belong. So by the time they get back from vacation, there's going to be this huge mess to clean up. And worse, while they're on their vacation, they're super aware of the fact that this mess is building up, creating this constant background stress and tension. So there is a lot of research out there that shows that women carry more of this mental load than men and are often seen as the managers, not only of themselves, but also of others, of emotions, of relationship dynamics, of schedules, of households, of teams, and of child rearing activities. So while mental load is something that impacts men and women, there is a disproportionately heavy impact on women because of the roles that we play in all of these different life domains. And mental load is one of the contributors to burnout. So it's not a surprise that burnout also impacts women in greater numbers than men, because when we are carrying a heavier mental load or a disproportionate weight mentally and emotionally, and that's adding to our stress, it's just another factor on top of all of the other stressors that we all deal with every day. So it's just an additional kind of layering on that makes us more vulnerable. And I think oftentimes with women especially, we hear this phrase like, you didn't have to do it all yourself. You should have just asked for help. Well, yes, we should ask for help. I've talked about that in other episodes. And when we tell somebody else that they should have asked, we are still demonstrating that we are expecting them to keep track of what needs to be done, the timelines they need to be completed, and to either complete it themselves or delegate it to somebody else. So they're still functioning as a kind of manager, a project manager or household manager. So when you're really working on a team with someone, whether that's in a romantic partnership or at work or in your friendships or family relationships, ultimately sharing this load so that one person isn't expected to know all of the things and do all of the planning and delegating themselves is really key. But the home management load is also a constant piece. This is constant, unrecognized, unpaid work that again falls disproportionately on women. Things like grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, even organizing finances, paying bills, all of these kinds of things. And while there are certain household tasks that do tend to be distributed to people who don't identify as women, women are more likely to handle tasks that are time sensitive and occur frequently. So essentially, mental load is heavy, and it's something that women carry more of than men just because of the way our society is set up, so that women have majority of the responsibilities around household management and child rearing, in addition to whatever roles they're fulfilling at work. So what the heck can we do about this? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to quantify what's happening and we need to communicate it. And while I think this is kind of another example of how this load is going to continue to fall on the people who are already carrying it, because they're still going to be responsible for quantifying and communicating, like that's an additional mental load. But in the short term, if we can take on this responsibility and figure out exactly everything that we're managing, and then communicate it out and delegate it out, then maybe in the long run, we don't have to continue to carry this load. So essentially, because we're already carrying it, we don't just want to drop it and then nobody does the things. Like, we have to prepare the people we're going to hand these tasks off to. And because we are the ones carrying it already, we're the only ones equipped to do that. So even though it feels a little bit, I think, frustrating for a lot of us to have to teach and delegate some of these things, if we do this in the short term, we can create long-term plans that are serving us in a bigger way. Next thing that we need to do is really assessing and redistributing those tasks. So that's that delegation piece, right? Within our households, within our romantic partnerships. And part of delegating and redistributing and creating a different balance so that everyone is playing their part and it's not unfairly falling onto one person's shoulders, is that for us women, we have to learn to let go of some of the control in these situations. If we make someone else responsible for something and they mess it up or do it wrong, we have to learn to be okay with that. Learn to be okay with some of the balls dropping until other people get used to juggling them. Because if we keep stepping in to correct, to fix, to try to perfect, we're continuing to bear that weight of the mental load, and we aren't really preparing other people to support us or to support the household in managing these things. So it also requires us to let go and release that control and trust other people to learn how to do these things, and recognize that even if it's not the same way that we did it, that's okay as long as the essential functions are being completed. There are other really simple things we can do to reduce the mental load, like just making life easier where we can. So one of the ways that I do this is by using like a meal delivery system, like HelloFresh or Home Chef. This has honestly been a life changer for me. I juggle a lot with multiple realms of work, and just having my meals, 3 meals a week, sent to me with all of the ingredients in the bag ready to go has lifted that mental load of feeling like I need to have those 3 meals planned. I need to buy all of the things for the ingredients and need to set aside, all of that time in preparing to even make the thing. And then there's the whole factor of just making the decision at the end of a day where I've made decisions all day for my business and supporting other people in the other work that I do in the world. I do not usually want to be making more decisions after like 6 o'clock at night. I'm like decision fatigue at that point. So to just have 3 options to choose from makes a world of difference. So I do highly recommend looking into some of these ways that we can streamline and set up auto deliveries, whether that's for meals or for even other essentials that run out regularly. Things like household cleaners and soaps and paper towel and toilet paper and all of these things that we are constantly tracking to make sure that we never run out of them. If we have a system of refreshing these that doesn't require us to keep track of it, it's one less thing on that conveyor belt that's coming towards us. And then another thing that we can do is just try to simplify our lives. Really, the more stuff that we have, the more things that we're doing, the more things that we own, the more things we have to manage. So really sitting down and evaluating what matters, what do we want to keep in our lives, and what do we want to reduce or eliminate. And then finally, and this is something I talk about all the time, but we need to embrace boundaries. We have to set them, we have to enforce them, we have to live them, we have to say no. And there are other episodes that you can listen to that dive into that more. But if we are able to do that well, we will reduce our mental load. So while these don't totally solve the problem of that invisible stressor of our mental load, it does give us some ideas of where we can start to reduce that a bit. So that being said, let's move on to our second category of invisible stressors, which is one of my favorite things to talk about: societal expectations and conditioning. So let's be completely honest, this could be an entire series of episodes. This could be, hours and hours of content. So we're just going to scratch the surface today. But there's a lot of things that fall into this category of invisible stress. And some of the things that I consider part of this like societal conditioning or expectations are things like body stuff, body image, appearance, productivity stuff, hustle culture, and relentless self-improvement. I am somebody that believes in constant like growth and healing, and I think self-improvement can become really toxic, and I think it has in a lot of settings. And this is because of the way that we have been conditioned to make ourselves into projects at the cost of our own mental health at times. So these are all things that, especially in the US where I live, are so infused into our society that we're just like swimming in them. We're breathing in the air that contains this stuff constantly. We're programmed with these messages, both subtle and obvious, that are saying things like, you should look like this, you should dress like this, you should age like this, graceful aging, you should parent like this, you should achieve these particular things, you should accomplish this by this age or within this time frame, you should work like this, your productivity should look like this, you should be able to manage your time more effectively, you should be able to biohack your entire life so that you can do more, be more, and achieve more. You should be able to improve this and change that and read this book to be better and fix all your problems and be less you. This is what the conditioning sounds like. These are the messages that we are receiving constantly. It's impossible to escape them. And the underlying message beneath all of these is that we are a problem that needs to be solved. That there is only one right way to be, and no matter how close to it you might feel like you are getting, you'll never get there. Yeah. It's exhausting. I don't know if anyone has heard this expression, you probably have, but this idea that we should stop shoulding ourselves to death. Basically focusing on this whenever we have should in our thought or in our sentences, in our vocabulary, it's likely indicating something that we believe we should do because we've been told by someone somewhere or society as a whole that that's the way to be. And I do agree. I do think that should is a great indicator that we need to bring some mindful attention to that and see if whatever's on the other side of it's actually serving us. But it is easier said than done, because when you are living in a world of toxic diet culture and hustle culture and this self-help, self-improvement culture that is relentless, that is constantly telling us we're not where we should be yet, and it's impossible to escape that, it is hard to catch these messages when they're coming up, and it is hard not to internalize them. It's hard not to believe them. We've been so consistently subjected to these messages that they just play on repeat in our mind, even without any external reminders from the world. We've confused this conditioning that we've received from society with our own thoughts. And it's really become like one in our mind. We can't differentiate between what we really believe, what we really want and need, and how we really are, and what the world around us has told us that we should be. And it's exhausting. It is so exhausting to constantly try to perfect ourselves, our bodies, our image, our relationships, our careers, striving for perfection is exhausting and pointless because you're never going to get there because it doesn't exist. I believe in excellence. I believe in growth. I believe in love. I believe in healing. I do not believe in perfection. I've suffered many wounds at the hands of perfectionism. And let me tell you, this stuff runs really deep. And while there's not an easy solution to offer, there is, I think, deep relief in acknowledging that this game is rigged and the cards are stacked against us and no one is really set up to succeed or win. That's kind of the point, because as long as we are disliking ourselves, we are going to keep trying to buy things to perfect or distract ourselves. So we're either going to buy things that we think are going to make us one step closer to the version we're supposed to be, or to distract ourselves from the pain that we haven't lived up to these expectations. So as a starting point, let's just make this stressor a little less invisible. Let's shine a light on it and just acknowledge how messed up this is. Once we've done that, then we can start to bring some more awareness to the ways that these unwritten rules are showing up in our own minds. And if we can learn to recognize them when they do occur in our minds, once we can see the thoughts that we didn't pick, we can start to deprogram them one at a time. And it is a long and painful process, but it can make a dramatic impact on our lives. There is a cognitive behavioral model that is incredibly useful for addressing these socially conditioned beliefs and narratives. And CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is something that I utilized when I was working as a mental health coach out in the field. And something I used to teach people was called the 3 C's in CBT practice. And the 3 C's stand for catch it, check it, change it. And these are so simple and easy to use and so impactful. So the way that you use the 3 C's in regard to social conditioning is that first we have to catch that unhelpful socially conditioned thought. For example, like, I'm only worthy if I don't have cellulite, or my house has to be immaculately clean all the time, or I'm only as worthy as I am productive, or I have to be the most productive person on my team or in my company. So we have to catch those thoughts in the net of our minds, bring them to conscious awareness, and then we have to check it. We have to interrogate it. We have to ask ourselves, is this helpful? Is it true? How do we know it's true? And is there something that is more true, more helpful, or more kind that we could replace this with? Once we've recognized that this thought isn't helpful or isn't true or isn't kind, we can change it. We have the power to change the thoughts that we are playing on repeat in our mind to something that serves us, that aligns with our values, that aligns with what we really want and need out of life. But the caveat here is that we have to make sure that we change it to something we still believe. Because if we try to replace our old socially programmed thoughts and beliefs with things that we don't actually believe, it doesn't work. It doesn't feel good. For example, we might really want to change the thought, I'm only beautiful if I don't have cellulite. We'll talk about the body image piece for a second here. So if we're thinking that and we recognize it, we recognize that we are thinking this thought, we might be tempted to replace it with something like, my cellulite is beautiful. Which, if you believe that, that's amazing. Definitely use that replacement thought. But if you are telling yourself to replace it with that, you're replacing the other thought with my cellulite is beautiful, but at the same time, like inside you're thinking, yeah, that's not accurate at all. Cellulite's disgusting. If that's what we're thinking, then telling ourselves that that's our thought replacement's not actually going to work. It's not going to be effective because we don't believe it. because some of the social conditioning is so deep that those beliefs and thoughts are all mixed up with our own. And we see things through a different lens because of what we've been exposed to. So in these situations, a more useful thought might actually be something like, normal human bodies have cellulite, and I have a normal human body. It might not be as glorious as cellulite is beautiful, but if it's more believable, it's going to be more effective. It stings less, and it feels more like something we can connect with. It helps us to start to take baby steps in the right direction in our mind and reduces our suffering dramatically. So essentially, the most useful thing that we can do when it comes to the invisible stressors of societal expectations and the conditioning that we have received from the world around us, from our families, from our religious institutions, from our larger societal structures, the thing that we have to do is take intentional time to bring them to our consciousness and do some mental reprogramming. And this does take time, and it does take practice, and you might need support, but that's okay. That's why there are coaches out there like me to help you work through this stuff in kind, gentle, and effective ways that work, ways that will get you results in your life. That's a really big piece, and I have to say I've experienced the benefits of really taking control of our minds and being aware of what the heck is in there and who put it there. If it's not something we picked, we don't have to keep it. This is a place of empowerment. We get to choose what we are living in our minds. We get to choose the thoughts that are rolling around in there if we take the time to bring them to our awareness. So that's a start. That's a starting point for that invisible stressor. And now I want to talk just a little bit about the last of the 3 categories of invisible stressors that I've been exploring today, which is the lost parts of ourselves. And this is actually connected to the societal expectations and conditioning, because essentially what I'm talking about here is like our return to psychological and emotional wholeness. Essentially, when we have these societal expectations and family expectations and religious expectations, they cause us to become shapeshifters of sorts, to try to fit into a mold that we've been sold about how we are supposed to be. And as we try to fit into that mold, we cut away parts of ourselves that don't fit. As we are trying to shapeshift and squeeze ourselves into a version of ourselves that we believe society will approve of, we cut away the parts that don't align. And this happens in so many subtle ways across our lifetimes. If we are ridiculed for our laugh, we will suppress our playfulness. If we're praised for losing weight, we'll exile the part of us that is starving. If we're belittled for asking questions, we will deny the part of ourselves that is curious. We essentially do surgery on ourselves, emotionally, mentally, from the time we are very young, to cut away all of the parts of ourselves that we believe don't fit into this mold. And this cutting away, this denying, this repressing, it's painful. And it leads to stress because it creates this feeling of not being whole, a feeling that we've lost ourselves, like we don't really know who we are or what we want or what actually matters. And all of the other work we've already talked about is really hard when we don't have a solid foundation of ourselves to stand on. When we've tried so hard to become who the world or the people around us wanted that we've lost ourselves, we don't know where to start. It feels like a gaping hole in our lives. It feels like we're acting, like we're playing a part in a play. And it's isolating. So we have to reclaim these lost parts of ourselves. We have to celebrate them. We have to love them. We have to reintegrate them into ourselves so that we can feel whole again. And one of the ways that I've done this in my personal work and my personal practice is through the use of Jungian theory. And while we don't have time to get into all of this, I think this could be an episode of its own. Essentially, Jungian theory says that all of the things that we repress and deny and exile become part of our unconscious mind. We just shove it really deep into the point that it's not even in our conscious awareness anymore. And then it becomes part of what Jungians refer to as our shadow, which is essentially anything that is unconscious. And the more dense and heavy our shadow becomes, the more it wreaks havoc on our lives in very mysterious ways. Another way to think about this is internal family systems therapy. This is a therapy process that essentially says we are all made up of an internal system of parts that works together like a family unit. And while some of those parts we've embraced and we've put on a pedestal and we have integrated into our lives, there are other parts that are wounded, traumatized, hidden, or exiled. So regardless of what kind of framework or context is useful for you, how you want to think about these lost parts, these rejected components of yourself, it doesn't matter which framework lands for you. It's about integrating. It's about healing and bringing awareness and compassion to these parts of ourselves that we have denied or abandoned. And I know this can sound kind of strange, especially if it's your first time hearing some of these thoughts and ideas, and that's totally fine. Just let it sink in. Let your mind kind of process it. But one of the things that I've used in my journey is shadow work. And this is something that is used to help us integrate and accept those other parts of ourselves so that we can live with more clarity and more authenticity and a lighter shadow. There are always going to be things in our unconscious mind, but we can reduce the amount of things there. And I mean, really, the weight of our shadow depends on how much of ourselves we've rejected. And a signal of this, a signal that we've rejected something, comes up in things like negative self-talk. It comes up in things like triggers. Triggers are incredibly powerful because they illuminate something that our subconscious is rejecting, something that it's very averse to, and it's signaling to us that something in our environment or in this other person or whatever is triggering us is reflecting back to us some rejected part of ourselves, some part of ourselves that we have not healed, that we have not made peace with. For example, if somebody speaks up and advocates for themselves in a work setting and you feel extremely uncomfortable, like you're gonna crawl out of your skin, you're being triggered by this act of this person speaking up and advocating for themselves in a work setting. Shadow work asks us to evaluate this feeling and why it's there. What about this is causing us discomfort and why? And it can take time and practice to get to the roots of it. And there are so many exercises that you can do to support you with this. But in this specific example, maybe this would rub you the wrong way because there was a outspoken part of yourself that when you were in childhood, you tried to speak up and advocate for yourself and you were ignored or punished or ridiculed for doing that. And so your brain compartmentalized and said, okay, advocating for yourself is actually dangerous and unacceptable. Exile that part. That part of yourself that's brave and outspoken needs to go away. You realize that that's not safe, and that part goes deep into the subconscious. Now, when you see that playing out with someone else, it feels unsafe. It feels uncomfortable. But you don't always know why if you don't spend the time exploring that. So essentially, our task, whether we're doing shadow work or parts therapy or whatever resonates with you for trying to bring some awareness to the parts of ourselves that we've lost, our task is the same. Our task is to acknowledge, befriend, and reintegrate the parts of ourselves that we've lost. thanking them for working to protect us, appreciating our minds for doing what they needed to do to survive, and then inviting these parts of ourselves that we've exiled to become part of the whole, to join into the party with the rest of us out in the open. It's an interesting process to start to reclaim those pieces of ourselves. And I will say, as someone who's personally done this work, as someone who continues to do this work, it is so incredibly liberating when you recognize that there's some piece of you that you left behind for whatever reason, and that you can grab it by the hand and pull it back, and that you can let it be part of your daily life, and that you can create a safe space for it now. It's liberating, it's empowering, and it does make me feel more whole to have been able to do that and to continue to do that as these things emerge. So I know this is kind of a lot, but once you've really identified these different invisible stressors, the mental load, our societal conditioning, our lost parts, all of these complexities, all of these contradictions, once you bring awareness to them and start to do this work, to start to reintegrate everything, to embrace all of yourself, to choose the thoughts you're thinking, to feel whole, and to celebrate yourself for all of that, once you start to do this work, your invisible stressors reduce, because you aren't carrying this invisible baggage behind you everywhere that you go. You really get to be intentional about what you bring with you in your mind, in your heart, in your life. And you get to liberate the parts of yourselves that have been chained up in the basement of your mind. So while this can all sound very complicated, I hope that there were pieces of it that made sense to you, that impacted you, that feel like something you can move forward with and start to do some exercises around. Highly encourage you to look up different shadow work practices if that's something that appeals to you, or cognitive behavior practices if that's something that aligns with where you would want to start. Again, if you want support with any of these, this is what I do. This is my joy in life, is to support other people in understanding the tools out there and knowing how to use them for themselves and walking them through that practice. So don't hesitate to reach out and request a consult if that's something that you really want support as you explore. Thank you for joining me today on this wild ride talking about our invisible stressors. I really hope it helped. And I hope that you are able to offer yourself some compassion as you go through the rest of your day. I hope you are able to give yourself permission to jump off the hamster wheel, to let the conveyor belt keep running until it's pure chaos, and to invite all of the lost parts of yourself back into this messy, complicated, and immeasurably beautiful human experience. That is my wish for you. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, take radically good care of yourselves out there. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you want more resources on thriving in your life or want details on working with me, check out my website at internallyguidedleadership.com or follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at internallyguidedcoach. Be gentle with yourselves out there, and I'll talk to you